Hello everyone, welcome back to the Story Web blog. My next installment in the Fantasy Lit 101 series is completely different. Today's video is actually a short history of the English language. Hopefully, I'll answer some of the most common questions about English, such as, is English a Romance language? You might have heard Shakespeare's language referred to as Old English. Does this mean old-fashioned English, or is Old English a separate language? Did Shakespeare even write in Old English, or in Modern English? To dive into our answers, we'll first touch on the history of England. England was originally inhabited by Celtic tribes. It was briefly taken over by Romans, who held much less control in England than they did in other parts of Europe. The first major large-scale invasion that's important to the history of the language was by the Germanic people from southern Denmark, often referred to as Anglo-Saxons. Once they had established themselves in England and pushed the native Celts into Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, the Anglo-Saxons were confronted with the Vikings. The Vikings raided the country heavily, but also settled and established a large community in the northeast of England called the Danelaw. It was centered in modern-day York. Finally, the Norman invasion began with the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Next, let's briefly consider what a language family is, because this is crucial to understanding English. A language family is basically a group of languages that share a common ancestor. These languages were once one language, which became differentiated as groups of speakers became separated and lost contact with each other. This is a language tree that I took from an illustrator who draws a really cool webcomic. I'll post that on the blog. This is a language tree of the Indo-European language family. Indo-European languages are spoken widely throughout the Middle East, India, and Europe. The European languages are divided into the Slavic languages, such as Russian, the Romance languages, Italian, Spanish, etc., and if you look all the way on the right, you'll see English, and that's actually a branch of the Germanic family. This means that it is most similar to German, Dutch, Norwegian, Swedish, those kind of languages, and although it does share ancestry with Spanish and Italian, most of the similarities between those languages and English came through French influence during the Norman invasion. So there's an important distinction between ancestry and influence. Let's begin discussing the history of English itself. The oldest form of English is Old English. This language was carried into England by the Anglo-Saxon invaders. It was spoken from about 450 to 1066. Please keep in mind that these dates are approximate. Language change is extremely gradual. It takes several generations for language to change just a little bit. Old English is the language that Beowulf, a famous epic poem, is written in. It looks very different from our modern English. But if you consider this sentence, if you knew that Michla meant great, you might be able to guess that this sentence means, here was the great winter. It's still a very different language, especially in terms of grammar. Most of our grammar and many of our vocabulary terms were actually carried into England by the Vikings, who spoke Old Norse. Old Norse and Old English were essentially mutually intelligible, making the diffusion of vocabulary terms between two languages much easier. Middle English is marked as beginning when the Normans arrived and brought their language with them. It is generally understood to have ended in the late 15th century, so about the time of Henry VIII. This is the language in which Chaucer wrote his most famous work, the Canterbury Tales. So let's look at the following example from the Canterbury Tales. Here, the word full means very. So if we say this out loud with modern English pronunciation, it would be full, or very, many a rich country had he won. Makes sense, doesn't it? After Middle English comes Modern English. The sort of transition phase between our language and Chaucer's is called Early Modern English. This is still Modern English, but it is a slightly older variant. The switch to Modern English from Middle English is generally marked by a difference in pronunciation of vowels. Although the reasons for this shift are unclear, it is generally understood that this shift had occurred by the late 15th century. So Shakespeare did write in Modern English. Although his works might be difficult to understand, that is often because of cultural or referential content, so the grammar is not that different. You can understand this sentence pretty much completely. Early Modern English and Modern English are separated by very fine grammatical boundaries. There are very few differences, and that is why they are generally considered to be the same. They are simply Modern English. There are unique dialects of English spoken all over the world. It's important to remember that each way of speaking English is unique and valuable. While we might have our rules for what is considered proper grammar in particular situations, the English we speak in our day-to-day lives is part of a history of language change that has been happening since language began. Thanks for watching. Feel free to get in touch with me through any of the ways listed. Also, stay posted for my video next week, which will be an introduction to feminist literary criticism.